The ivory silk of Alana Baptiste's wedding dress whispered against the marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel like a ghost's warning. 25 years old, about to become Mrs. Marcus Webb, carrying the unbearable weight of her father's 8-month-old absence like stones sewn into her pockets. 200 guests waited in the ceremony hall. Colleagues, distant relatives, socialites who'd known her father, Marcus's business associates whose faces blurred together in her memory. They were probably checking their watches now, wondering what was taking so long, whispering behind manicured hands. But Alana needed one moment. Just one private moment with Marcus before she walked down that aisle completely alone. Her father would have been beside her if the cancer hadn't ravaged him from a vital, laughing man into a shadow in 6 brutal months. He would have squeezed her hand with his familiar strength, would have whispered one of his terrible dad jokes to ease her nerves. Why do birds fly south for the winter? Because it's too far to walk. She could almost hear his voice, warm and slightly raspy from the illness even at the end. Instead, she had only memories. His final days, when morphine made his words slur, but his love remained crystal clear. He'd held her hand with what little strength remained and told her to be careful, to trust her instincts, to remember that she was stronger than she knew. She'd thought he meant about grief, about navigating the world without him. Now, standing in this corridor with her heart hammering against her ribs, she wondered if he'd seen something she'd missed. The storage room door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar, light spilling out in a thin golden line. She heard Marcus's voice drifting through, that smooth, confident tone that had first captivated her at a charity gala 3 years ago. She'd been 22, drowning in the aftermath of her mother's sudden death from an aneurysm. Marcus had appeared at her father's annual fundraiser like an answer to an unspoken prayer. Handsome, successful, interested in her. Not her money, he'd insisted so earnestly, but her. The real her. He'd seemed like a life raft in an ocean of grief. Solid. Dependable. Real. Alana pushed the door open wider, already smiling, already reaching for the comfort of his presence before the biggest moment of her life. The scene that greeted her would replay in her nightmares for months to come. Marcus had Simone pressed against the storage room wall, one hand fisted in her carefully styled hair, the other gripping her waist with possessive intensity. Their mouths were locked together with the desperate, hungry passion of lovers denied too long. Simone, her best friend since their freshman year at Columbia, who'd held her through panic attacks after her mother's funeral, who'd spent weekends helping her sort through her father's belongings, who'd squealed with joy when Marcus proposed, had her fingers tangled in his perfectly styled hair, pulling him closer, closer, as if she could consume him. The maid of honor dress, a soft lavender that had taken 3 fittings to perfect, was bunched up around Simone's thighs. Marcus's tuxedo jacket hung open, bow tie askew. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't hear Alana enter. Didn't sense her world ending in real time. The bouquet of white roses, her mother's favorite flower, chosen as a tribute to her memory, slipped from Alana's fingers. It hit the floor with a soft thud, petals scattering across the marble like drops of blood at a crime scene. The sound cut through their passion like a knife through silk. They broke apart, both turning toward the door. Simone's lipstick was smeared across her chin and Marcus's mouth, making him look like a child caught with stolen candy. 4-3 heartbeats, Alana counted them, 1, 2, 3, they all stood frozen in a tableau of betrayal. The air smelled of Simone's perfume, the expensive French one Marcus had given her for her birthday. Alana had thought it was sweet at the time, her fiancé and best friend getting along so well. She'd been such a fool. Then Marcus's face transformed. Not into shame or regret or even surprise, but into something calculating. Something that made the floor tilt beneath Alana's feet. He exchanged a glance with Simone, a look of such intimate understanding that it told Alana this wasn't the first time, wasn't an impulsive mistake, wasn't anything but exactly what it appeared to be. A long con. And she'd been the mark. Marcus wiped Simone's lipstick from his mouth with his thumb, taking his time, deliberately casual. He straightened his bow tie with steady hands. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the casual cruelty of someone revealing a punchline they'd been sitting on for years. "Well," he said, almost pleasantly, "I suppose we're done pretending now." Alana found her voice, though it emerged from somewhere far away, somewhere the old naive Alana still existed and believed in love and loyalty and friendship. "I'm calling off the wedding." The words should have held power. Should have been a declaration of dignity, of self-respect, of her worth as a human being. Instead, They landed in the musty air of the storage room like dead birds falling from the sky. Marcus laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that echoed off the walls. With what money, Alana? She stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words, to understand what they meant, why he would say something so bizarre at this moment. Behind him, Simone straightened her dress, checking her reflection in a compact mirror with a casual air of someone who'd just finished a pleasant lunch rather than destroyed a friendship. When she caught Alana's confused stare, she started to laugh too, high and sharp, like glass breaking, like the sound of joy curdling into cruelty. Did you really forget? Marcus continued, his tone almost gentle now, the way one might speak to a particularly slow child who needed a complex concept explained in small words. 3 months ago, darling. The lawyer's office. All those tedious documents you signed without reading because you trust me so completely. He paused, savoring the moment. You signed everything over to me. The company. The properties. Every investment portfolio your daddy left you. Everything the old man spent his life building is under my management now. You made me your financial power of attorney. The room tilted violently. Alana's hand shot out, gripping the doorframe to stay upright. Her wedding dress suddenly felt like chains, heavy and suffocating. She remembered that day, had sat in the lawyer's office while Marcus explained that it was standard procedure for engaged couples, that it would make things easier after the wedding, that he only wanted to help her manage the overwhelming responsibility of her inheritance. The documents had been dense with legalese, page after page of terms she didn't understand. She'd been so grateful. So relieved to have someone competent take care of the details that made her head spin and her heart ache with reminders of her father's absence. She'd trusted him completely, had signed every page without question, her hand shaking slightly from the emotion of it all, from the gratitude she'd felt that someone loved her enough to shoulder these burdens. You can't, she whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were wrong. He already had. The expression on his face told her everything. Marcus stepped closer, and she could smell Simone's perfume on him, could see the satisfaction gleaming in his eyes like coins reflecting light. This was his moment of triumph, and he was going to savor every second. I already have, sweetheart. Did you really think I wanted to marry you for your sparkling personality? For your mind. For your body. He laughed again, the sound scraping against her skin like sandpaper. You were a mark, Alana. The easiest mark I've ever run. A lonely, grieving, desperate little girl who made it almost too easy. He glanced back at Simone, who'd finished fixing her makeup and now leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, watching the scene unfold like it was entertainment put on for her benefit. We've been planning this for 2 years, Marcus continued, his voice warming with pride at his own cleverness. Since before I proposed. Every dinner I sat through while you cried about your father. Every night I pretended to care about your stupid charities and your feelings. Every time I said, I love you, and watched you melt like butter. All of it, every single moment, was for this. The words hit Alana like physical blows. 2 years. Not just the engagement but their entire relationship. Every memory she treasured. Their first date at that Italian restaurant where he'd ordered wine that perfectly complemented her meal, the weekend in Martha's Vineyard where he'd proposed at sunset, the quiet nights when he'd held her while she grieved, all of it had been performance. Calculation. A long game played with expert precision. Simone pushed off from the wall, crossing to stand beside Marcus with a natural ease of long familiarity. Her smile was cold, almost pitying, the way you might look at a stray dog too stupid to come in from the rain. You were always so naive, Lana, Simone said, using the nickname she'd given Alana their freshman year, turning it into mockery. Even in college. Remember when you got that boyfriend sophomore year, Tom? The one who cheated on you with half the campus? We all knew, but you were the last to figure it out. You always trust too much, believe too easily. It's like you're asking to be used. She moved closer, her voice dropping into something almost conspiratorial, as if they were still friends sharing secrets over wine. Marcus and I used to laugh about it. About how easy you were to manipulate. How you'd believe anything if it was wrapped in enough emotional sincerity. Do you know how many times I fed him information about you? Your fears, your insecurities, exactly what to say to keep you hooked. Every time you confided in me, I went straight to him. You built the trap yourself, really. We just baited it. The betrayal was layered, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. Not just Marcus, but Simone too. Not just during the engagement, but for years. Every confidence she'd shared, every vulnerable moment, every time she'd sought comfort from her best friend, all of it weaponized against her. The wedding is still happening, by the way, Marcus added, almost as an afterthought, checking his watch like they were running behind schedule. You can either show up and play your part, smile for the guests, say your vows, pretend everything is fine, or you can make a scene. Either way, I keep what's mine now. Your father's fortune is already being liquidated, funneled through enough shell corporations that it'll take years for anyone to trace. By this time next year, Simone and I will be set for life. He gestured vaguely at Alana, a dismissive wave that encompassed her dress, her tears, her entire existence. And you'll be exactly what you are without your father's name and money. Nothing. Nobody. Just another spoiled rich girl who ended up on the street where she belongs. Then they laughed. Both of them, together, their voices mingling in perfect harmony. The sound echoed off the storage room walls, bouncing back at Alana from every direction, surrounding her with their shared amusement at her pain. They laughed like she was the punchline to a joke they'd been telling for years, like her devastation was the funniest thing they'd ever witnessed. Simone actually wiped tears from her eyes. You should see your face right now, she gasped between giggles. Oh my God, Marcus, look at her face. Something inside Alana shattered. Not her heart, that had broken the moment she'd seen them kissing. This was deeper, more fundamental. It was the breaking of her belief in the basic goodness of people. The death of the girl who trusted easily, loved freely, believed that kindness would be reciprocated. That girl died in the storage room of the Grand Meridian Hotel, surrounded by the laughter of her fiancé and best friend, wearing a wedding dress that would never see an altar. Alana turned and ran. She didn't remember leaving the room, didn't remember the shocked faces of hotel staff as she sprinted through the lobby in her elaborate gown, didn't remember the moment the autumn rain started to fall. Her mind had fractured into 1,000 pieces, each one reflecting a different memory now painted in poison. Marcus's patient explanations about financial management, calculated manipulation. Simone's encouraging words about signing the papers, deliberate sabotage. Every "I love you," every hug, every shared confidence, all of it, lies built on lies built on lies. The city swallowed her whole. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. We post new stories every week, so don't miss out on new updates. The first 3 days existed in a blur of shock and survival instinct. Alana walked until her feet bled in the wedding heels she still wore, until blisters formed and burst and formed again, until every step was agony but stopping felt like surrender. The silk dress, once pristine and beautiful, became a shroud, torn from catching on fences, stained with rain and grime and the reality of streets that had never been part of her carefully constructed world. The city transformed around her as she walked, moving from the glittering downtown she'd known all her life to neighborhoods where the streetlights flickered and died, where her designer dress marked her as prey and stranger danger lurked in every shadow. This was Manhattan beneath the veneer, the city her father's wealth had always insulated her from, now laid bare in all its harsh truth. She tried using her credit cards at hotels. All declined. The clerk at the Marriott had given her a pitying look. "I'm sorry, miss, but it says here the account has been closed." She'd tried 3 more before understanding dawned. Marcus had moved fast, faster than she'd thought possible. At a payphone, she called her bank with shaking fingers, feeding in the last of the loose change she'd found in her clutch purse. The representative's voice had been professionally apologetic. "I'm sorry, Ms. Baptiste, but Mr. Webb, as your designated financial manager, has frozen all accounts pending restructuring. You'll need to contact him directly to resolve this." Her phone died within hours, the bill unpaid. Marcus had controlled all her accounts, she realized with growing horror. The subscription she'd thought was automatic? Gone. The credit cards in her name? Tied to accounts he now controlled. Even her email, linked to passwords she'd stored in a document on a cloud service he'd set up for her, locked away. She'd been erased. Methodically, thoroughly, with the precision of someone who'd planned every detail. On the 4th day, she sold her engagement ring to a pawnshop in a neighborhood where the buildings leaned against each other like drunks. The man behind the counter, tattoos covering his arms, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, had turned the 3-carat princess cut over in his thick fingers, examining it with a jeweler's loupe. "I'll give you 1,000 for it," he said finally. 1,000. Alana's voice cracked. "It's worth 20 times that. Lady, you're selling to a pawnshop. You want full value, go to a jeweler. But something tells me you need cash now." She took the 1,000. It felt like a fortune and an insult simultaneously. The ring Marcus had presented with such ceremony, the symbol of a love that had never existed, reduced to a fraction of its value, just like her. The money bought her a week in a motel that rented by the hour, where the walls were thin enough to hear every transaction, every cry, every human misery playing out in adjacent rooms. She lay on sheets that smelled of bleach and desperation, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like maps of countries she'd never visit, and tried to make a plan. But planning required hope, and hope had died in that storage room. She tried calling friends. Most didn't answer. She used the motel's phone, and their caller ID probably showed an unknown number they ignored. Those who did pick up had clearly already been reached by Marcus or Simone. Their voices went cold, making excuses. "I'm sorry, Alana, but after what you did to Marcus, I just don't think we should talk anymore. What she'd done to him." The narrative had already been crafted and distributed, her reputation destroyed while she'd been walking the streets in a ruined wedding dress. Marcus had been thorough. Had isolated her completely, poisoned every relationship, ensured that when she fell, there would be no one to catch her. By the 10th day, she had $17 left. The shelter had a 3-week waiting list. The soup kitchen had run out of food by the time she arrived, and the volunteers had looked at her with suspicion. She was young, looked healthy despite the weight she'd lost, was clearly from money based on her speech and bearing. Why wasn't she working? Why wasn't her family helping? The judgment in their eyes stung almost as much as the hunger gnawing at her stomach. She learned the geography of survival. Which restaurants threw out their unspoiled food at what times. Where she could wash her face in public restrooms without being chased out by security. How to avoid eye contact, how to disappear into the urban landscape, how to be nobody. The naive girl who trusted Marcus Webb died a little more each day, replaced by someone harder, sharper, forced into existence by necessity. Alana learned what hunger felt like. Not missing a meal, but days without food, the way it made your hands shake and your vision blur. She learned what real fear was. Not nervousness before a speech, but the animal terror of being vulnerable to predators in a world that didn't care if you lived or died. She learned that privilege was invisible until it was gone, and its absence left you naked in a world built on assumptions about who deserved help and who deserved contempt. It was hunger that led her to the alley behind the Korean barbecue restaurant on the 12th night. The smell of cooking meat had drawn her like a siren song down a side street she'd never noticed before. Her stomach cramped with a hunger that had moved beyond pain into something like madness, and she'd thought, maybe, possibly, there would be something in the trash. Not scraps, she told herself. Perfectly good food that restaurants had to throw out due to health regulations. It was different. It had to be. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the dumpster lid, the metal cold against her palms. The smell was overwhelming, rot and waste and the faint underlying scent of the food that had drawn her here. She was reaching in, trying not to think about what she was doing, when a hand grabbed her arm. The grip was iron, spinning her around so fast she stumbled. 3 men. She registered details in flashes of fear. The first was missing teeth, his smile a jack-o'-lantern grin in the dim light from a flickering street lamp. The second had a tear tattoo under his left eye. The third was younger, maybe early 20s, but his eyes were old and hard and empty of anything resembling mercy. "Look what we have here," the first one said, his breath reeking of alcohol and something rotten. "Pretty girl going through our trash. You lost, princess." Alana tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, fingers digging into her arm hard enough to bruise. Her spine hit the brick wall, rough through the remains of her dress. She thought about screaming, but who would come? Who cared about another woman in trouble in this part of town at this hour of the night? "Please," she heard herself say, hating the fear in her voice, hating how small she sounded. "I don't have anything. Just let me go." "We don't want your money, pretty girl," the second one said, moving closer. His intentions were clear in his eyes, in the way he looked at her like she was meat. This was how it ended, Alana thought with a strange, detached clarity. Not with betrayal or poverty, but with violence in a dark alley. All her father's money, all her mother's hopes for her future, all her privilege and education and carefully constructed life, and she would die here, unmourned except perhaps by Mrs. Hill, having trusted the wrong people and paid the ultimate price. She closed her eyes, waited for the inevitable. Then came footsteps, measured, unhurried, confident in a way that made the night itself seem to pause and take notice. "The lady said no." The voice cut through the alley like a blade through silk, quiet, accented with Korean inflections, carrying more threat in 4 words than most men could convey with a shout. Alana's eyes snapped open. The man who emerged from the shadows wore a suit that probably cost more than the entire contents of the alley, black on black, perfectly tailored to his lean frame, not a thread out of place despite the late hour and the rough neighborhood. He was Korean, perhaps 30, with features that the streetlight carved into something beautiful, almost regal. High cheekbones sharp enough to cut. Dark eyes that reflected the light like obsidian, cold and measuring. Black hair styled back from his forehead with precision that suggested he'd stepped out of a boardroom rather than into a back alley that reeked of trash and desperation. But it wasn't his appearance that made the three men freeze. It was something in his presence, an aura of controlled violence, of power held on a leash that could be released at any moment. He looked at the three men the way someone might look at insects they were deciding whether to step on or simply ignore. Kim Do-hyun had built his empire on the ability to convey threat without ever raising his voice. To make men understand, in their animal hindbrain where survival instinct lived, that he was the apex predator and they were food. The man holding Alana released her arm as if she'd burned him. "This ain't your business," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty, gone thin and reedy. Do-hyun smiled. It was the most dangerous expression Alana had ever seen, empty of warmth, full of promise. "You have 3 seconds to leave." He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't need to. All three men scattered like roaches when the lights come on, disappearing into the darkness so quickly it was as if they'd never existed. The alley fell silent except for Alana's ragged breathing. She was still pressed against the wall, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd hold her. The adrenaline that had kept her frozen was draining away, leaving her hollow and weak. Do-hyun turned to her, and his expression shifted marginally from lethal to assessing. He studied her face in the dim light, his gaze traveling from her tangled hair to her ruined dress to her bleeding feet. She saw the moment recognition flickered across his features, subtle as a ripple on still water. "You're the Baptiste heiress." It wasn't a question. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "I saw your engagement announcement in the society pages." Of course he had. Marcus had insisted on the full-page spread in the Times, had probably used her father's name and connections to make it happen. More performance, more lies, all building toward his ultimate con. "I was," Alana said, her voice hollow as a bell with no clapper. "I'm nobody now." Do-hyun studied her for another long moment. In his mind, calculations were already running. He'd been in the business of reading people, of finding leverage and weakness and opportunity, for 15 years. Since he'd been 15 himself and his father's gambling debts had nearly gotten their family killed, forcing young Do-hyun to take matters into his own hands with a brutality that still occasionally haunted his dreams. He'd built his empire, legitimate and otherwise, on the principle that everything and everyone had a use. Resources were to be acquired, assets to be deployed, problems to be solved through whatever means necessary. Love, sentiment, compassion. These were weaknesses his competitors exploited and he'd trained himself to suppress. Looking at Alana Baptiste, he saw an opportunity. The disgraced heiress, publicly humiliated, desperate, and vulnerable. The society pages had been full of whispers about her cancelled wedding, her sudden disappearance. Her former fiancé had been making the rounds, painting her as unstable, unreliable, someone who'd had a breakdown and fled her own wedding. But Do-hyun had built his fortune on information, and his sources had told him different stories. About Marcus Webb's shell corporations. About missing money from Baptiste Industries. About a con that had been running for years. He'd filed the information away as interesting but irrelevant to his interests. Until now. Now, looking at this broken woman who'd once been worth hundreds of millions, Do-hyun saw exactly how she could be useful to him. "You can't stay here," he said, pulling out his phone. "This area belongs to people who won't show you mercy." He spoke rapid Korean to whoever answered, giving an address. Then to Alana, "I'm Kim Do-hyun. Come with me. I'll get you somewhere safe." She was staring at him with the wary eyes of someone who'd learned that help came with strings attached, that kindness was usually a mask for cruelty. Good. He preferred people who weren't naive. "Why would you help me?" "Let's say I recognize a useful opportunity when I see one. We can discuss the terms over a proper meal." He paused, noting the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "When did you last eat?" The fact that she couldn't answer told him everything he needed to know. A black Mercedes pulled up to the mouth of the alley, silent and expensive, so out of place in this neighborhood it might as well have been a spaceship. Do-hyun gestured toward it. "Come. Or stay here and see if those three come back with more friends. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. But Alana Baptiste had learned in 12 days on the street that survival sometimes meant accepting help from devils because the alternatives were worse. She followed him to the car, and as it pulled away from the alley, she watched the dumpster disappear in the rearview mirror. She didn't know it yet, but she was leaving behind more than just the site of her near assault. She was leaving behind the last remnants of the girl who'd trusted Marcus Webb, who'd believed in love and friendship and fairness. What would emerge from the ashes was something harder, stronger, more dangerous than anyone, including Kim Do-hyun, could anticipate. Kim Do-hyun's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Hanseong building in downtown Manhattan, all glass and steel and views that transformed the city into a glittering kingdom. Alana stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows 2 hours later, clean for the first time in almost 2 weeks, her hair still damp from the longest shower of her life. She was dressed in clothes that actually fit. Black silk pants and a cream cashmere sweater, courtesy of Do-hyun's assistant Min-ji, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s who'd appeared with shopping bags and asked no questions. The shower had been a revelation and a nightmare. Washing away the grime of the streets, she'd watched weeks of survival circle the drain and wondered if she'd ever feel truly clean again. The water had run brown at first, then gray, then finally clear. She'd stood under the scalding spray until her skin turned red, scrubbing at herself with expensive soaps that smelled of jasmine and rain, trying to wash away more than just dirt. When she'd finally emerged and looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back. Hollow-eyed, sharp-featured, the soft roundness of her face carved away by hunger and stress. The bruises on her arms from the men in the alley were already yellowing. Her ribs showed too prominently under her skin. She looked like a sketch of Alana Baptiste, all the important details present but the essence somehow missing. Do-hyun had left her alone for those 2 hours. Now he returned carrying 2 bowls of what Min-ji had identified as kongnamulguk, Korean soybean sprout soup, light and nourishing, perfect for someone whose stomach had shrunk from lack of food. He set them on the table without ceremony and waited while she ate. Alana forced herself to go slowly despite the gnawing hunger. The soup was complex and comforting, warmth spreading through her body with each spoonful. She could feel Do-hyun watching her with those calculating dark eyes, reading her the way you might read a contract, looking for clauses and loopholes and weaknesses. "So," she said finally, setting down her spoon. Her father had taught her to meet problems head-on. "What are the terms?" "Direct." Something that might have been approval flickered across Do-hyun's face. "I appreciate that." He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He'd changed from the suit he'd worn in the alley into black pants and a simple black t-shirt, but somehow he looked no less intimidating. If anything, the casual clothing emphasized the lean muscle of his frame, the coiled readiness in the way he moved. "I need a fiancé," he said bluntly. "Fake, of course. Convincing enough to fool investors and satisfy my mother's matchmaking compulsion. 6 months minimum, possibly a year." Alana had expected many things, but not this. "Why?" "I'm expanding my business interests. There are certain conservative elements in the investment community who view a married man as more stable, more trustworthy. They want to know I have something to lose, someone who keeps me grounded." His expression remained neutral, but she caught the faint edge of disdain in his voice. "I also need my mother to stop introducing me to every eligible daughter in her social circle. Some of them are becoming persistent in their inquiries about my business activities. And what do I get?" Do-hyun's eyes glinted with something like respect. "Protection. Resources. A place to stay that isn't an alley or a flophouse. Most importantly, time and space to figure out how to reclaim what Marcus Webb stole from you." The way he said Marcus's name, flat, slightly contemptuous, made something twist in Alana's chest. Anger. The first real anger she'd felt since that storage room, burning through the numb shock that had carried her through the last 2 weeks. "Because you're not going to let him keep your father's fortune, are you, Miss Baptiste?" Do-hyun continued, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who understood exactly what kind of person sat across from him. For the first time since her world had shattered, Alana felt something like purpose ignite in her chest. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not." Do-hyun pulled a folder from the side table, sliding it across to her. Inside were printouts, bank transfers, corporate documents, photographs of Marcus entering a building that looked suspiciously like a law office. "I had my people do some preliminary research after I saw the news about your cancelled wedding. Your former fiancé has been busy. Shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. Property transfers. He's systematically liquidating your father's assets." Each page was another knife wound. Another piece of her father's legacy stolen, sold, hidden away in accounts Marcus had probably been setting up for years. "But he made mistakes," Do-hyun continued. "He moved too fast, got greedy. There are ways to trace this. Ways to fight back. It will take time, resources, and expertise in navigating both legal and—" He paused significantly, "less conventional channels. And you have these resources." "I do. Why help me?" Alana asked, even though she already knew the answer. Nothing was free, especially not from a man like Kim Do-hyun. "What do you really get out of this?" His smile was sharp and honest. "Respectability. Access to social circles that don't typically welcome people like me. A partner who understands that this is a business arrangement, not a romance. And potentially, when you reclaim your fortune, a very well-connected ally with reason to be grateful. It was transactional. Cold. Honest in a way Marcus had never been. I have conditions, Alana said. Name them. When the time comes, I want to face Marcus myself. I want him to see what he created. I want to look him in the eye when everything he stole is taken back. The words came out harder than she'd intended, edged with the anger that was building in her chest like pressure behind a dam. Do-hyun's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. He dealt in revenge daily in his business. He knew what it looked like when someone needed to personally deliver justice. Agreed. Anything else? I want to learn. Everything. How money moves, how to protect assets, how to read people, how to see through lies. She leaned forward, her voice intense. I never want to be that naive again. I never want to be vulnerable like that again. If I'm going to reclaim what's mine, I need to be someone different. Someone stronger. This time, Do-hyun's smile reached his eyes. I can teach you that. Consider it part of the arrangement. He extended his hand across the table. Alana looked at it for a long moment. Elegant, long-fingered, the hands of someone who'd built an empire through combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. She knew, looking at those hands, that she was making a deal with someone dangerous. Knew that Kim Do-hyun used people as tools, that his help came because she was useful to him, not because he cared about her pain or her need for justice. But she'd learned something important in those 12 days on the street. She'd learned that sometimes you had to use the tools available to you, even if those tools were sharp and dangerous. Most importantly, she'd learned that she would do whatever it took to make Marcus Webb regret the day he decided Alana Baptiste would be his mark. She took Do-hyun's hand. His grip was warm, firm and final, a door closing on one life and opening onto another. When do we start? She asked. Tomorrow. Tonight, you rest. Eat. Sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow, we begin transforming you into someone Marcus Webb won't recognize. The transformation wasn't gentle. Do-hyun proved to be an exacting teacher, demanding excellence and accepting no excuses. Within a week, Alana's days had structure again, but it was nothing like her old life of charity lunches and social events. She woke at 6 for physical training with Do-hyun's personal trainer, an ex-military woman named Sarah who pushed her until her muscles screamed. Strength isn't just physical, Sarah told her during a particularly brutal session. It's knowing your body will do what you tell it to, even when it hurts. After training came breakfast with Do-hyun, where he tutored her in reading financial statements, identifying fraudulent transactions, understanding the complex web of international finance that Marcus had used to steal from her. She learned about shell corporations and offshore accounts, about how money could be made to disappear and how to trace it anyway. Your father's company had strong fundamentals, Do-hyun explained one morning, spreadsheets covering the breakfast table. But Marcus has been bleeding it systematically. See here, these consultant fees? The companies don't exist. He's paying himself through fake vendors. Alana studied the numbers, her anger crystallizing into something cold and focused. Each fraudulent transaction was another crime, another piece of evidence, another nail in Marcus's coffin. In the afternoons, Minji tutored her in what she called social intelligence, how to read micro-expressions, detect lies, control her own emotional responses. You were raised to be open, trusting, genuine, Minji explained. These are beautiful qualities that men like Marcus exploit. Learn to weaponize them instead. Evenings were for their public appearances. Do-hyun had moved quickly to establish their relationship in Manhattan's social circles. They attended charity galas, business dinners, cultural events, always together, always presenting the image of a devoted couple. At first, Alana found the pretense exhausting. Do-hyun was an attentive fiancé in public, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her through crowds. Leaning close to whisper observations that looked intimate but were usually tactical assessments. The man in the blue tie has been embezzling from his company. He'll be arrested next week. Don't stand too close. Desperation is contagious. She learned to play her role. The reformed heiress who'd found love after tragedy. She smiled and made small talk and deflected questions about Marcus with carefully crafted responses that Minji had helped her prepare. Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan. I'm grateful it happened before the wedding rather than after. People ate it up. The narrative of resilience was easier to digest than the truth. But beneath the performance, something was changing in Alana. The softness that had made her vulnerable was hardening into something else. Each morning's training session built muscle and confidence. Each financial lesson gave her tools to understand how she'd been robbed. Each social event where she successfully played her part proved she could control the image she projected. She was becoming someone new. Someone Marcus Webb wouldn't recognize. The cracks in Do-hyun's careful distance started to show after 6 weeks. It was small things at first. Coffee appearing at her breakfast place, brewed exactly how she liked it without her having to ask. Finding a first edition of her favorite novel, The Count of Monte Cristo, appropriately, left on her nightstand with no note. The way his hand would linger a moment too long when helping her out of cars. For his part, Do-hyun told himself it was simple appreciation for a apt student. Alana was proving remarkably adaptable, transforming from the broken woman in the alley into someone who could hold her own in any room. She was useful. That was all. But he found himself thinking about her at odd moments. The way she laughed at his dry observations during events, genuine laughter, not the performative kind most people in his world offered. The fierce focus on her face when she studied financial documents, determined to understand every detail. The quiet vulnerability she showed only in their private moments, when the armor came off and he saw the woman beneath the performance. It unsettled him. Do-hyun had built his empire by keeping people at a distance, by never confusing business with emotion. He'd learned young that attachment was liability, that caring about people gave your enemies leverage. But Alana was working her way under his defenses without even trying. The night of the Hanseong group dinner changed everything. This meeting mattered more than most. Chairman Park represented a consortium of investors crucial to Do-hyun's expansion into legitimate business sectors. They were conservative, traditional, deeply skeptical of his background. They needed to see stability, commitment, the kind of domestic foundation that suggested he was ready to leave his darker enterprises behind. Alana wore emerald silk that Minji had selected, elegant, expensive, the kind of dress that whispered old money and new power. When she emerged from her room, Do-hyun felt something catch in his chest. She'd changed so much in 6 weeks. The hollow-eyed woman from the alley had been replaced by someone who carried herself like royalty. Her weight had returned to healthy levels, her skin glowed, her eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there before. She was beautiful. She'd always been beautiful, even broken in that alley. But now she was formidable too, and the combination was devastating. In the car on the way to the restaurant, Do-hyun found himself reaching for her hand without conscious thought. Her fingers laced with his, and the gesture felt less like performance and more like something real. The dinner tested them. Mrs. Park was sharp, her questions designed to expose cracks in their story. How did they meet? How long had they known each other? What made them certain this relationship would last where Alana's previous engagement had failed? Under the table, Do-hyun's hand found Alana's. He told himself it was part of the act, a gesture of solidarity. But his thumb traced circles against her palm with a tenderness that had nothing to do with performance. When Mrs. Park asked about their engagement, Do-hyun heard himself spinning a story that was half truth, half wishful thinking. He described seeing Alana for the first time and knowing she was worth protecting. The words came out softer than he'd intended, carrying an emotion he hadn't meant to reveal. Alana added her own details, her voice warm and convincing, and the story they created together was impossibly romantic and entirely fabricated. Except it wasn't. Not entirely. Not anymore. The dinner ended successfully. Chairman Park agreed to invest. Mrs. Park dabbed at her eyes and declared them the most romantic couple she'd met in years. They'd won. In the car home, they sat in silence, the city lights sliding past the windows. Do-hyun's hand still held hers, neither of them letting go. The air between them felt charged, full of things unsaid. "That was good tonight," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Very convincing." "We're getting better at lying," Alana agreed. Another silence, heavier this time. Then, was it all a lie? She turned to find him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Vulnerable, uncertain, human in a way that the ruthless businessman never allowed himself to be in public. "Do-hyun." "Forget I asked," he said quickly, withdrawing his hand and turning to look out the window. "It's late. You should rest." But Alana couldn't forget. And that night, lying in her separate bedroom in the enormous penthouse, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. Somewhere between playing the part and living the lie, the lines had blurred. She'd started to look forward to breakfast with him, to their quiet conversations that stretched past midnight. She'd begun to feel safe in his presence in a way she'd never felt with Marcus, because Do-hyun had never pretended to be something he wasn't. His darkness was honest. His protection came with clear terms. He gave her choice, even in their arrangement. And beneath the cold businessman exterior, she'd glimpsed something else. Dry humor. Unexpected kindness. A man who'd been forced by circumstances to become hard but hadn't lost his humanity entirely. This was dangerous territory. She was supposed to be healing, reclaiming her power, not falling for another man who'd positioned himself as her protector. But maybe that was the difference. Hyun had never asked her to be weak. He was teaching her to be strong. The ambush came 10 weeks into their arrangement. They were leaving a business dinner when 3 black SUVs boxed in their Mercedes. Men in masks poured out, moving with military precision. Hyun's driver reached for the gun under his seat, but Hyun's hand shot out, stopping him. "Wait," he said, his voice ice. His eyes scanned the attackers, reading the situation with the speed of someone who'd survived situations like this before. Then to Alana, "Stay in the car. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." But Alana saw the gun one of the men carried, saw the odds, 8 against 3, even with Hyun's security team. She saw him preparing to step out into danger, and something primal overrode every instinct for self-preservation. She hit the door lock override. "Alana, no." She was already out, moving to his side, her heart hammering but her hands steady. Hyun's expression transformed. First shock, then fury, then something that looked like fear. What followed was brutal and efficient. Hyun moved like violence made elegant, every motion economical and devastating. His security team, she'd finally noticed them, always following at a discreet distance, appeared from nowhere. The fight was swift and savage. And through it all, Hyun kept himself between Alana and danger, his body a shield even as he took down attackers with controlled precision. She saw him take a knife slash across his forearm, saw blood bloom dark against his white shirt, and felt something crack open in her chest. When it ended, when the attackers had fled or been subdued, he rounded on her with genuine fury transforming his features. "I told you to stay in the car." The words came out harsh, raw with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "Do you have any idea what could have happened? If they'd gotten to you, you could have been killed," she shot back, her own fear manifesting as anger. "Did you expect me to just sit there and watch? I can handle myself." He stopped, his jaw working. "You can't risk yourself like that." "Why not?" The question came out quieter now, but no less intense. "This is just an arrangement, right? You said it yourself. I'm useful. That's all." Hyun stared at her, and something in his expression cracked open, showing her everything he'd been hiding behind careful control. The rain fell between them, around them, washing blood from his arm in pink rivulets. "Is that what you think?" His voice had gone quiet, dangerous in a completely different way. "That you're just useful to me?" Before she could answer, he closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence of moments before. "You're the first person who looks at me and doesn't see a weapon or a wallet," he said, the words coming out rushed, like a confession he'd been holding back too long. "You laugh at my jokes, my actual jokes, not the polite society laughter. You challenge me. You make me want to be more than what I've built. More than the man who had to become hard to survive." "Hyun. I know the arrangement. I know this was supposed to be temporary, strategic, mutually beneficial. But He stopped, laughed bitterly. "I'm falling in love with you, Alana. And I have no right to. Not when you're still healing. Not when I represent the same thing he did. Power, protection, control." The rain fell harder now, soaking them both, but neither moved. Alana felt her own armor cracking, all the walls she'd built since that storage room crumbling like they'd been made of paper. "You're nothing like him," she said fiercely, her hands coming up to cover his where they still framed her face. "Marcus took everything from me and made me believe I needed him. You gave me space to find myself again. You helped me remember who I was before him, and become someone stronger. That's not the same thing. That's not even close to the same thing. Alana." "I'm falling in love with you too," she said, the words ripping out of her like a confession torn from her soul. "And it terrifies me because I swore I'd never be vulnerable again. But you make me want to try. You make me want to trust. To believe that not everyone who offers protection is trying to own me." He kissed her then, rain-soaked and desperate, his hands sliding from her face to her hair, pulling her closer like she was air and he was drowning. She kissed him back with months of denied wanting, tasting rain and relief and the terrifying beauty of a second chance. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "We'll do this right," he said, his voice rough. "Slowly. On your terms. No pressure, no expectations. Just us. Figuring this out together. "What if my terms include immediately going home and continuing this?" she asked, a smile pulling at her lips despite everything. His answering smile was bright enough to light the darkness, genuine joy transforming his usually controlled features into something boyish and beautiful. "Then I'm the luckiest man alive." They went home. And for the first time since that storage room, Alana let herself be vulnerable, not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to choose it. 3 more months passed. Months of falling deeper in love, of building something real and solid from the foundation of their arrangement. But beneath the surface of her happiness, Alana was also building something else. A case, a plan, a path to justice. Do-hyun's investigators were relentless. They mapped out Marcus's crimes in forensic detail, spreadsheets tracking every stolen dollar, diagrams showing the web of shell corporations, evidence of fraud that would make prosecutors salivate. Marcus had been siphoning money from her father's companies for over 18 months, moving millions through accounts in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Switzerland. But the investigation also revealed something unexpected, something that made Alana cry for the first time since Do-hyun had found her in that alley. Her father had protected her. The documents appeared buried deep in the corporate records like buried treasure, trust agreements, property deeds, stock certificates, all held in a name that made Alana's breath stop. Margaret Hill. Mrs. Hill. Their housekeeper for 30 years. The woman who'd bandaged Alana's skinned knees as a child, who'd served tea at her father's funeral with tears streaming down her face, who'd been more family than employee. According to the legal documents, every major asset Gregory Baptiste owned had been placed in an irrevocable trust with Mrs. Hill as trustee. The structure was brilliant, designed by her father's legal team with provisions that protected the fortune from exactly the kind of predator Marcus had proven to be. The trust specified that assets would remain under Mrs. Hill's control until Alana turned 26 or until she requested their return in the presence of her father's designated attorneys, whichever came first. Marcus had only ever accessed the liquid cash Alana had inherited directly and a handful of smaller properties, perhaps 5% of her father's actual estate. Everything else, the majority of the fortune, the company itself, the real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, had been completely beyond his reach. Do-hyun found her in his study, the trust documents spread before her, tears streaming down her face. He pulled her into his arms without a word and held her while she cried. "He knew," she said when she could finally speak. "My father knew what Marcus was. All those times Dad seemed distant during my engagement, when he'd look at Marcus with that expression I couldn't read, he knew. He was protecting me even then. He gave you space to make your own choices," Do-hyun said softly, his hand stroking her hair. "But he made sure those choices wouldn't destroy you. That's love, Alana. Real love. The kind that trusts you to fall but makes sure the ground isn't so hard it breaks you." She looked up at him, and the parallel wasn't lost on either of them. Do-hyun had done the same thing, given her space to heal and grow, but ensured she had resources and protection if she needed them. Had taught her to be strong without demanding she be perfect. That was when she knew, with absolute certainty, that what they had was real. "I need to see Mrs. Hill," she said. Margaret Hill's modest home in Queens was exactly as Alana remembered. Neat garden with roses her father had helped plant, painted shutters, the kind of comfortable middle-class home her father had ensured Mrs. Hill could maintain even after retirement. When the door opened and Mrs. Hill saw Alana on her doorstep, the older woman's face crumpled. "Miss Alana," she said, pulling her into a fierce hug that smelled of the lavender soap she'd always used. "I've been so worried. When you disappeared after what happened. I wanted to find you, but the trust terms were specific. You had to come to me." They sat in the kitchen where Alana had eaten homemade cookies as a child while her parents were away on their numerous work trips. The same worn table, the same comfortable chairs, the same sense of safety she'd always felt in Mrs. Hill's presence. Mrs. Hill made tea, the special chrysanthemum blend she'd always prepared for Alana's mother, and then retrieved a locked box from her bedroom. She opened it with a key she wore around her neck on a simple silver chain. Inside were all the documents. Deeds to properties Alana had forgotten her father owned. Stock certificates for Baptiste Industries and a dozen other companies. Account information for investments worth tens of millions. Everything her father had built over 40 years of brilliant business decisions, kept safe, held in trust until his daughter was ready. "Your father came to me 2 years ago," Mrs. Hill explained, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly as she touched the papers. "He said that Mr. Webb, he never called him Marcus, always Mr. Webb with that particular tone, couldn't be trusted. He'd done background checks, found discrepancies in Mr. Webb's story. A pattern of targeting wealthy women, though never before with such a long-term plan." Alana listened, her heart aching with love for her father and fury at Marcus in equal measure. "But Mr. Baptiste also said you needed to learn some lessons on your own. That you'd been too protected, too sheltered. he said. Mrs. Hill's eyes filled with tears. He said that when you fell, you'd discover who you really were. And then you'd rise stronger than before. He made me promise not to intervene unless you came to me directly. He trusted you to find your way back. The papers spread across the kitchen table represented more than just money. They represented her father's faith in her. His understanding that the greatest gift he could give wasn't protection from all harm, but the tools to recover from it. The knowledge that she could fall and still rise. Could be broken and still heal. Could lose everything and still reclaim herself. What do I do now? Alana asked, though she already knew the answer. Mrs. Hill smiled, the same knowing smile she'd worn when Alana was 7, and asking if she should tell her parents she'd broken a vase. What do you want to do? The answer was simple. Crystal clear. I want Marcus Webb to understand exactly what he lost when he decided to betray me. I want him to face consequences. And then I want to move forward with my life, not defined by revenge, but freed from the weight of his theft. Mrs. Hill nodded slowly. Your father would be so proud. He always said you had steel in your spine, hidden beneath that soft heart. You just needed the right circumstances to forge it into a blade. Alana thought about the woman she'd been, naive, trusting, so eager to believe the best of people. That woman had died in a storage room and been buried in an alley. What had emerged was someone harder, wiser, capable of channeling love into strength rather than weakness. She gathered the documents, evidence of her reclaimed empire, and felt the final pieces of her plan click into place. It was time for Marcus Webb to learn that he'd underestimated his mark. The conference room at Baptiste Industries was exactly as Alana remembered from childhood visits. Rich wood paneling, her grandfather's portrait stern on one wall, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan financial district where 3 generations of her family had built something meaningful. The long table could seat 20. Today, it hosted 12 board members, 2 attorneys, and the man who'd thought he'd stolen everything. Marcus Webb sat at the head of the table. In her father's chair. The sight of it ignited something cold and sharp in Alana's chest, not the hot anger of those first terrible days, but something more dangerous. Controlled fury, ice-cold and absolutely certain. Simone sat beside him, her hand on his arm in a possessive gesture that would have hurt 6 months ago. Now it just looked pathetic, 2 parasites clinging to each other because they had nothing else. They'd married 3 months after the cancelled wedding, she'd learned. A small ceremony, very private. How romantic. How convenient. And how stupid, legally speaking, since Simone's inheritance from her own family had been quickly absorbed into Marcus's schemes. Alana entered the conference room in a tailored black Armani suit that Hyun had selected, severe, expensive, the kind of outfit that communicated power and warned people not to waste her time. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with a steady rhythm of inevitability. Hyun entered beside her, not ahead. He was support, not her protector. There was a difference, and it mattered. The room went quiet. Every board member's eyes tracked to her. These were men who'd known her father, who'd watched her grow up at company events, who'd been told some story by Marcus about her mental breakdown, her inability to handle the pressure of her inheritance. Now they saw something different. Alana Baptiste had left this building a girl. She returned a woman, forged in fire and absolutely done with other people's narratives. Marcus's expression when he saw her was everything she'd hoped for, shock bleeding into something like fear before his lawyer face slammed into place. Beside him, Simone went pale. Alana, Marcus said, his voice dripping false concern. This is unexpected. I thought you were… Well, we heard you were struggling with some mental health issues. This really isn't. Sit down, Mr. Webb, Alana said, her voice cutting through his performance like a blade through tissue paper. And shut up. The adults are talking now. The room froze. Several board members actually gasped. No one spoke to Marcus Webb like that. He'd spent 6 months building an image of benevolent leadership, the reluctant hero stepping in to manage the company after the heiress had her breakdown. That image was about to shatter spectacularly. Alana's attorney, a shark of a woman named Patricia Barnes who specialized in corporate fraud, began distributing thick folders to each board member. Inside, Patricia said, her voice professionally neutral, you'll find documentation of systematic fraud perpetrated by Marcus Webb over the course of 18 months, beginning before his engagement to Miss Baptiste and continuing through the present day. Alana watched Marcus's face as the board members opened their folders. Watched him realize, page by page, exactly how thoroughly they'd documented his crimes. Bank transfers to shell corporations. Fake consultant fees paid to non-existent companies. Property transfers at undervalued prices to entities he controlled. Asset liquidations with proceeds disappearing into Cayman Island accounts. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Alana, sweetheart, I know you've been going through a difficult time, but these allegations are supported by 18 months of financial records, testimony from whistleblowers in your accounting department, and cooperation from 3 international banking regulators, Patricia said pleasantly. But please, continue digging your hole deeper. My billable hours appreciate it. Furthermore, Alana said, her voice steady and cold as winter steel, you should all know that Mr. Webb's control over my inheritance was always limited to a small fraction of my father's estate. The trust documents on page 47 show that my father placed the majority of his assets, including his controlling interest in this company, in an irrevocable trust managed by Mrs. Margaret Hill. She saw the moment it hit him. Real fear, stark and animal, flashing across Marcus's features before he could control it. That's impossible, he said, but it came out weak. I had everything verified. The estate documents showed you exactly what my father wanted you to see, Alana finished. You got the bait, Marcus. The liquid cash, a few properties. Enough to make you think you'd won. But the real fortune? The company, the property portfolio, the investment accounts? Those were always beyond your reach. She pulled out a chair directly across from him and sat down, leaning forward with her hands clasped on the table. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but carried to every corner of the room. My father knew what you were from the beginning. Did you really think a man who built this company from nothing wouldn't run background checks on his daughter's suitor? He found your pattern, Marcus. The string of wealthy women you'd pursued over the years. The small cons that never quite resulted in charges. He knew exactly what you were planning. Marcus's carefully constructed facade was cracking now, pieces falling away to reveal the desperate conman underneath. This is speculation. You can't prove. I can prove all of it, Alana said. I have testimony from 3 of your previous marks. Women you targeted before me, who were too ashamed to press charges when you moved on to easier prey. They're willing to testify now. Funny how your marriage to my former best friend gave them courage. Apparently they've been comparing notes. She glanced at Simone, who looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. How much did he steal from your trust fund, Simone? Or were you too busy helping him steal from mine to notice he was robbing you too? The other woman's face went from pale to red. She started to stand, but Marcus grabbed her arm, holding her in place. The gesture was controlling, almost violent, and Alana felt a flash of satisfaction. Let Simone learn what it felt like to be trapped by someone she'd trusted. The board has a choice, Alana continued, turning back to the board members who were reading through the documentation with increasingly grim expressions. You can accept Mr. Webb's resignation effective immediately and cooperate with the investigation. Or you can stand by him while he's arrested, and make no mistake, criminal charges are being filed today, and face questions about your own oversight failures. She didn't need to elaborate. The implication was clear. The board members who'd allowed Marcus to operate unchecked would face scrutiny, potential liability, reputational damage. One by one, they looked from the documents to Marcus to Alana. She saw the moment the calculation finished in their eyes. I move that we accept Mr. Webb's resignation, one of the older board members said, a man who'd been her father's college roommate. Effective immediately. Seconded, said another. All in favor? The vote was unanimous. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. You think you've won? You think this is over? I'll fight this. I'll tie you up in court for years. I'll destroy what's left of your reputation. Try it, Alana said, her voice absolutely calm. I have more money than you ever dreamed of stealing. I have better lawyers. I have evidence of multiple felonies. And most importantly, Marcus, I have nothing left to lose. You made sure of that when you destroyed me so thoroughly I ended up in an alley eating from dumpsters. She stood now, moving around the table until she was directly in front of him. Close enough to see the fear and fury warring in his eyes. Close enough to see exactly how much she'd terrified him. You taught me an important lesson, she said softly, just for him. You taught me that trust is a weapon. That softness is vulnerability. That love can be the greatest con of all. I'm grateful for it, actually, because you destroyed a naive girl and created someone strong enough to take everything from you the way you took everything from me. She stepped back, turning to the board. Security will escort Mr. Webb and Mrs. Webb from the building. They have until close of business to remove their personal items. Anything left behind becomes company property. As if summoned, 4 security guards appeared at the door. Real security, not the men Marcus had hired to replace her father's longtime team. This isn't over, Marcus hissed as the guards moved forward. You haven't won. Yes, Alana said, cutting him off. I have. And you're going to have a very long time to think about that. Federal fraud charges carry significant prison time, Marcus. I hope that storage room was worth it. She watched, they all watched, as security escorted Marcus and Simone from the building. Marcus tried to maintain dignity, walking rather than being dragged, but his hands were shaking. Simone was crying, mascara running down her face, her earlier contempt dissolved into panicked tears. The conference room door closed behind them with a sense of finality. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the board member who'd known her father stood and extended his hand to Alana. Welcome back, Ms. Baptiste. Your father would be very proud. She shook his hand, accepting the acknowledgement, but she wasn't thinking about pride or victory. She was thinking about how far she'd come. From the girl in the storage room, the woman in the alley, the broken thing Marcus had tried to destroy. She'd survived. More than that, she'd evolved. Become someone stronger, harder, more dangerous than Marcus Webb could have imagined. Hyun was waiting for her outside the building. He didn't ask how it went. He could read the answer in her face, in the way she carried herself. Instead, he simply took her hand and laced their fingers together. Home? He asked. Alana thought about the penthouse that had become her sanctuary, where she'd healed and grown and learned to love again. Thought about the future she was building with this dangerous, complicated man who'd rescued her not by saving her, but by teaching her to save herself. Yes, she said. Let's go home. 1 year later, Alana Baptiste stood in her office, the corner office that had been her father's, now truly and completely hers, and reviewed the quarterly reports that showed Baptiste Industries thriving under her leadership. She'd restructured the entire company, cutting the corrupt practices Marcus had implemented, rebuilding relationships with partners and clients who begun to distance themselves during his tenure, expanding into new markets with aggressive innovation. The business press called it a remarkable recovery. Industry leaders praised her vision. But the truth was simpler. She'd just removed the rot and let the solid foundation her father and grandfather had built shine through. Then she'd built something new on top of it, something that bore her own stamp. The criminal trial had been swift and brutal. Marcus faced 15 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. His lawyers had tried for a plea deal, but Alana had refused to negotiate. She wanted Marcus to face every single charge, to sit through every day of testimony describing his crimes in forensic detail. The jury had deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. 15 years in federal prison, minimum. Asset forfeiture of everything he'd stolen and everything he'd purchased with stolen funds. Full restitution to Alana and the other women he'd conned over the years. Not that there was much left to recover after legal fees. Simone had cut a deal, testifying against Marcus in exchange for a lighter sentence. 5 years probation and community service. Alana had seen her once since the trial, working at a diner in Queens, her designer clothes replaced with a polyester uniform. She'd looked up, met Alana's eyes, and quickly looked away again. Alana had felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Simone was simply irrelevant now. The wedding invitation on her desk was simple and elegant, nothing like the elaborate nightmare she'd almost endured with Marcus. Just 40 guests, an autumn garden at Hyun's mother's estate, promises made with eyes open and hearts willing. They'd waited a full year after the trial, wanting to be absolutely certain this was real. Wanting to build their relationship on something solid rather than the crisis that had brought them together. Hyun had proposed properly. No arrangement, no transaction, just a man on his knee asking the woman he loved to spend her life with him. She'd said yes without hesitation. He'd retired from the darker aspects of his business, as promised. The legitimate enterprises he'd built were more than profitable enough, and with Alana's connections and business acumen, they were expanding rapidly. They made a formidable team. His strategic brilliance and her social intelligence, his ruthless focus and her moral compass, his protection and her strength. Equal partners. That was the promise they'd made to each other. A knock at the door pulled Alana from her thoughts. Hyun entered without waiting for permission, a privilege she allowed only him. He carried coffee from the place on the corner they both loved and crossed to her desk to set it down with a kiss that still made her heart skip. Ready? He asked. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Almost. She gestured to the papers spread across her desk. Just reviewing the new expansion proposal. He leaned against her desk, reading upside down the way he'd learned to do when they studied financial documents together. It's aggressive, but solid. You've done incredible work here, Alana. She looked up at him, this man who'd found her at her lowest point and given her not rescue, but opportunity. who taught her to be strong without trying to control her, to rebuild without losing herself. Alana closed the folder, stood, and took his hand, the weight of the past finally light on her shoulders. Once, the world had broken her. Now she met it on her own terms, clear-eyed, steady, and unafraid. Together, they walked toward the boardroom, not as savior and survivor, but as equals, ready to shape whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, loves, please like and subscribe. Help our channel grow so we can put out more fascinating stories every week. Thanks for watching.